Having time to reflect back on some of the ways my life has changed from when I wasn't paying much attention to the goings on till now, I've realized quite a few things. I found it was often difficult to see beyond the proverbial scope in which I perceive the world. I know everybody perceives it differently, nothing groundbreaking, based on what has or hasn't impacted us in this or that way, shapes our worldview. Everybody has a worldview, though, depending on how fluid or rigid that view is, determines our capacity to assimilate new concepts. For the most part, we accept the world in which we've been presented and haphazardly reject that which is contrary to our beliefs. But that's exactly what you'd imagine would happen in a society that often fails to take a second look at or revisit some of what we typically think to be true. I know by no means will I garner appropriate attention to the key issues that could help solve some of the problems we face today. And what key issues, right? Isn't that just determined by worldview as well? No matter where you stand, politically, religiously, hopefully those of you listening can agree on this. Many aspects of life are rapidly evolving and, in a fundamental way, our social infrastructure is morphing into a more self-centered culture where instant gratification and vanity is proliferated. We're living in this on-demand society where essentially anything can be dispensed at the touch of a finger, and in case you were wondering, yes, there's an app for that. The up-and-coming generations are likely to face drastic challenges overcoming some of the hurdles accompanying technology. Some are having less meaningful interactions, while others are less actively involved in real-world scenarios. Verbalizing internal turmoil is replaced by an emoji, and checking and liking a status supplants conversation. Not in all cases, just increasingly more, while what are otherwise deemed as rational adults refuse to set arbitrary differences aside to better a country and, by osmosis, possibly the world. All of this is culminating during a period where the next few years are really going to shape the framework for the future. But what if that's the agenda? What if certain low people in high places were actually working against the American citizens and, by osmosis, the world? Let's briefly talk about the quadrupedal megafauna in the room. The intricately designed control grid steered at captivating the minds and imaginations of the masses to exert corporate and political control through psychological conditioning and social engineering. George Orwell in the frighteningly accurate masterpiece 1984 outlined how certain human qualities and freedom of thought can be methodically and surreptitiously subverted without knowledge of it. A few of the core themes in the seemingly prophetic book is most notably mindless self-deception, subservience, and eradication of privacy. Remind you of anything today? It's difficult not to draw parallels and highlight some of the similarities to the surveillance states burgeoning all across the pond in recent years. Those following the tech world or the world of surveillance have probably already heard about this, but for those of you who haven't, in the summer of 2017, one of those voice-activated digital assistants akin to Google Home or Amazon Echo was activated during a domestic dispute and ultimately phoned law enforcement. The device apparently misheard a command, so this isn't the result of self-adjusting algorithms or conscious computing known as artificial intelligence or AI. Perhaps not in this case anyway. If this is a legitimate incident and not part of some campaign to pull people's attention away from the fact that these appliances are basically wiretaps, this device potentially saved a life. But setting aside the emotional arguments, let's look at this from a different angle. By now, you should be familiar with the gradual release of documents and evidence encompassing government surveillance. The trickling of damning information such as unconstitutional mass monitoring of citizens serves the purpose of desensitization. You can only be subjected to something for so long before you either become involved in changing it or build a tolerance altogether. Stories like the one I mentioned often sidestep the issue of privacy concerns. Now, I'm not going to make this all about spying, but you've got to wonder what the endgame is when millions of people are carrying an eye and an ear in their pockets, completely unaware they paid for their own supervision. These devices can add a certain quality of life. I'm not peddling cold turkey. I'm advocating moderation, especially for our children, for reasons that will become clear in a moment. Our lives tend to be so busy, we're willing to spend more for things like entertainment and convenience, yet we hardly invest in free information like the following, even though, again, it's literally at our fingertips. Children who watch Baby Einstein and Brainy Baby are inclined to have poor vocabularies. The American Academy of Pediatrics, dedicated to the health of all children, for several years made recommendations against children viewing television. They suggest that pediatricians should urge parents to avoid television viewing for children under the age of 2 years. Although certain television programs may be promoted to this age group, Research on early brain development shows that babies and toddlers have a critical need for direct interaction with parents and other significant care providers for healthy brain growth and the development of appropriate social, emotional, and cognitive skills. This goes back to the challenges I stated the up-and-coming generations are likely to face. If nothing else, this gives us another reason to limit, if not our exposure, the exposures of those who will one day be faced with the consequences of our disinclination to moderate our indulgence. It's not just the children. Almost every time we receive a message in anticipation of its notification, a production of chemicals are triggered in our brains, dopamine, serotonin, adrenaline, stimulating a micro-sensation that over time we become accustomed to. It's completely unsurprising those more susceptible to habit-forming behaviors have become reliant or dependent on the array of various applications available on the market. This addiction makes the users reluctant to relinquish the pleasures and stimulus of their external devices. Like wiretaps disguised as useful gadgets, we just don't seem to see things sometimes for what they are. I know I often paint with a broad brush and wide strokes, but I do know that there are exceptions to virtually every rule. For example, we're living in the age of information, though that seems to be a misnomer since most information is selectively chosen to tailor to one's beliefs. Articulate as I pretend to be, similar principles used to govern my life. Again, it was difficult to see the world beyond the proverbial scope I was viewing it through. I was relatively content with what I knew and wasn't looking for a fresh way to view things either. Though over time, gradually, very gradually, I began to open up to the possibility I wasn't the smartest person I knew. See, I've always had what I consider to be a towering intellect, not because of any natural ability, but an innate compulsion to fill my time with things of a more academic nature. Movies, music, sports, and celebrities were never my strong point. In fact, even to this day, I still get heckled for not recognizing the name or face of certain actors, musicians, or athletes. Sure, I'm hip to some of the blockbusters, but typically not until they end up streaming or in the discount DVD bin. In many ways, being a sort of reclusive bookworm played to my advantage up until I could no longer reconcile the world I thought I knew with the life I'd been living. Though most of my childhood I've heard be yourself, and if you work hard you can be anything, as I got older, everybody seemed to be heading in the same direction. College, career, spouse, kids, retirement. This cookie-cutter life everybody was striving for, yet at the same time touting their inimitable distinctiveness. I recognized I was doing the same thing as the people I, in my mind, because that's the only place it was happening, disassociated myself from. I was trying to get ahead in the carrot-on-a-stick economics of the standard model. American dream? More like the American gamble. Put yourself thousands of dollars in debt with a student loan and hope for the best in an increasingly unpredictable economy and an ever-fluctuating job market subject to sudden downturns. Most of us are putting our money into a bag with holes in it and don't even realize. We pay a minimum payment for most the rest of our lives, and compared to the ruling class, we make poverty wages. There is a tumultuous, unequal distribution of wealth that people are starting to wake up to but aren't in the position to do anything about. Soon people will be demanding a solution. That solution will be part of the New World Initiative with countless adjuncts of control. The Fourth Reich, the New World Order, the beast system. Maybe that's why we carry an eye and an ear in our pocket, to be easily tracked and located when the final phases of the control grid are implemented. In the book of Joel, chapter 2, verse 28, God says, "And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, your young men shall see visions." Acts chapter 2, verse 17 parallels with, "And it shall come to pass in the last days, saith God, I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams." I'm not calling myself a prophet, but I believe we are in, if not rapidly approaching, the last days, and as a result, there is a shift taking place, sweeping over the nations right now, stirring up individuals like myself. Isaiah 62:6 says, "I have set watchmen upon thy walls, O Jerusalem, which shall never hold their peace, day nor night. Ye that make mention of the Lord, keep not silence." If you found this channel, it's not accidental. Believe it or not, I don't come from the background most believers do. I didn't attend church regularly as a kid, and religion was never forced down my throat. In fact, I'm not religious and don't subscribe to a denomination. I picked up a Bible and over time have been led by the Spirit since. In a lot of ways, the approach I took is beneficial because you don't have your view tainted by the traditions of men. I give you First John 2:27, which states, "As for you, the anointing you receive from him remains in you, and you do not need anyone to teach you. But as his anointing teaches you about all things, and as that anointing is real, not counterfeit, just as it has taught you, remain in him." Believe it or not, most of what I do here on my channel to some is review. Though I plan to, I have yet to dive as deep as many other channels have. I still have a lot of content to convert into audio video format that I did years ago. That was clearly practice for whatever the Lord must have envisioned for me. I don't believe in coincidence. I believe in what many call synchronicity, which I call God being anonymous. Ultimately, it's him that's in control, not the Illuminati or Freemasons. Even they have someone they take a knee to. You don't have to explicitly examine the logic of my content in order to understand what I'm attempting to convey. Similarly, you don't need to be a believer for some of my messages to resonate with you. That's where the church is seriously getting it wrong. We aren't called to judge and force faith upon those who don't believe the same as us. That's the identical curriculum in our public indoctrination system, which tells you what to think instead of how to think. In fact, Luke 9:5 states simply, "If people do not welcome you, leave their town and shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them." Again, I'm not religious, nor am I a Democrat or Republican. In the religious world, those who bear beliefs different from the church are considered a heretic. In the political world, when you hold a controversial belief, you're a conspiracy buff. It's not that people don't want to wake up, they don't know there's something to wake up to. Well, I think I've done enough damage for one day. I'll leave it here and pick it up later. Thanks for spending part of your day with me.